right, we are good, we're rolling. My name is Amanda. I am an educator here at the Michigan Science Center. If you've been here before, you may have seen me. I am also an entomologist. I specifically studied wasps. I studied their behavior. Animal behavior is a really interesting study because you can actually relate it to human behavior, because we are animals too. So as I do my talk and discussion, I'll talk not only about wasp behavior, but how it does relate to human behavior. And then at the end, I will take questions, and I have all kinds of cool things that you guys can look at under the microscope, and I even have live wasps here you'll be able to take a look at as well at the very end. All right, so we're going to start with wasps. And what are wasps? So most people say anything that stings is a bee. Oh, that's a bee, that's a bee, that's a bee. But they're actually very different. So classification of wasps, they are insects, right? Insects have 6 legs, they have antennae, they have 3 body segments. They are insects. They are under a different group in order Hymenoptera. Hymenoptera contains ants, wasps, and bees. Okay, so these are the social insects, ants, wasps, and bees, Hymenoptera. And then we can break it down even more, and we can say that they're in family Vespidae. Vespidae are wasps, yellow jackets, and hornets. All right, so what are the difference between wasps, yellow jackets, and hornets? Well, yellow jackets are probably the ones you're going to associate with the most aggressive. So these are the ones you're going to find underground in colonies, and they're yellow striped and they're highly, highly aggressive. These are the ones you're most likely going to get stung by. All right, yellow jackets. The paper wasps, these are the ones I worked with. They're actually fairly docile. They're really not that aggressive. They really won't sting unless you threaten them or their nest. However, an interesting fact about the paper wasp is that their stinger is the most painful of all of them. So they're least likely to sting you, but when they do, it hurts the most. All right. Hornets, the bald-faced hornet in particular is not a true hornet. It's actually a yellow jacket. They call it a hornet because it behaves like a hornet, but it's actually a yellow jacket classified. And then the hornets, such as the European hornet, are bigger, and their nests are quite different. So am I popping in and out? I feel like I'm popping. Am I good? All right. All right, so all of them have smooth-like stingers, so they can sting you repeatedly, which isn't good, but that's how they survive. They survive their stinging. All of them build nests out of paper. Now they do that by taking wood pulp and chewing it and mixing it with their saliva and then making nests out of paper. And a fun fact, if you give them construction paper, colored construction paper to build their nests will be all rainbow colored. So their nests are whatever color they make their paper out of. Typically they're kind of grayish because that's what color the tree bark is that they get. All right, now yellow jackets, like I said, build their nests on the ground. Paper wasps build open nests underneath eaves. Hornets build closed nests. So if you see a nest that's all closed and has a little hole in the side, that's going to be a hornet nest or a bald-faced hornet nest. So those are the differences between the 3 types of wasps. Now the other question that I always get is, what's the difference between a wasp and a bee? A wasp and a bee. So wasp versus bees. Now when most people know bees have a queen, right? They have the queen bee. Wasps, however, can have multiple females on the colony, girls on the colony, that can lay eggs. So in a bee colony, there's only one. There's only one that can lay eggs. But in a wasp colony, there's multiple ones that can lay eggs. So it's very different that way. We call these multiple females foundresses. Okay, foundresses. So when there's more than one, because they found the nest. And they're usually sisters. Queens in bees look different than the workers. They're usually bigger. They have a bigger abdomen. All right, but however, queens and wasps usually look the same. They might be slightly bigger, but it's not going to be noticeable unless you take actual measurements. They look very similar. Wasps have a smooth stinger, like I mentioned. Bees, most of them have barbed stingers. Now you say that the bee stings you and it dies afterwards. Well, the reason that the bee dies is because its barb gets stuck in your skin. And when it pulls away, it leaves its venom gland to still pump the venom in your skin, but the bee dies because it pulls it out. And the bee dies. But the wasp can sting you multiple times because they have that smooth stinger and doesn't get stuck in your skin. Bees have wax hives. Now I mentioned that wasps have paper. They have wax. They actually build wax colonies, and you've seen beeswax before. Wasps are typically predators. Okay, that means they hunt other things. So they hunt caterpillars, other pest insects to feed to their larvae. Bees are pollinators. They feed on nectar exclusively. Okay, they don't hunt any other insects. And usually when you think of a wasp, it's going to be smoother. Bees are a little more hairy. Okay, so there is a significant difference between bees and wasps and their behavior and colony cycle. All right, bees and wasps. All right, I had a nice video to show you, but I was having technical difficulties with the video. However, at the end, if there's anything you would like to see up close, I do have a great video of some of this wasp social structure and their colony interactions. So wasps are eusocial, which is kind of a big word. But that just means that they have cooperative brood care. That means everybody takes care of the queen's babies. Okay, no matter if they're related, if they're their own kin or not, they cooperative brood care. They are all multiple generations in one colony. So this is what it means to be eusocial. The only example of an animal that's eusocial besides an insect are the naked mole rats. Naked mole rats are eusocial, but mostly insects are eusocial. So I talked about foundresses. Foundresses are ones that are capable of laying eggs. And then we have workers. Workers do all the work on the colonies, just like bees. And then we have the males and the giants, which giants are potential queens. All right, potential queens. And the males look different. So most of you, when you see the insect like a bug's leg, the girls have the curly antenna, right? Well, it's actually not accurate. In insect society, it's the boys that have the curly antenna. So if you want to tell the difference between a male and female wasp, we have the female here with the straight antenna. The males usually have a yellower face, and their antennas are curled, and they cannot sting you. Males do not have a stinger. They will not hurt you. It's the females that will sting. All right, so how do wasps' colonies work? So in the spring, you might see wasps come out, start initiating colonies. That means they start colonies on the eaves of your buildings. And they're philopatric, which is a big word, but all that means is they like to go back to the same place where they were born. Okay, so that's why you might say, I knocked that down last year. Why do I keep getting the same wasp? Well, they like to come back to the same spot. Sometimes wasps will settle a colony with one, but sometimes they'll join their sisters. And they'll settle a colony together. And when they're all together, that means they're more protected. In nest construction I talked about, so then the queen's the one that's the majority egg layer, so she's going to lay the eggs in the colony, and her subordinates, which are her sisters, will help rear her young. Okay, they'll help rear her young. So she'll lay eggs, and the eggs will turn to larvae, kind of like a caterpillar, right? A butterfly and caterpillar. And then they'll pupate, and then they'll come out as workers. And then the workers take over the colony and do the majority of the work. All right, and then at the end of the colony cycle, we have the queens, or the reproductive females and males, that come out at the end of the colony cycle, and then they mate, and then the queens overwinter. So the queens will actually climb into your attic or your garage, and they'll sleep there all winter, and they'll come out the next winter. So that's basically the colony cycle of the paper wasp. All right, so I'm going to specifically talk about the paper wasp. We have two species of paper wasps in Michigan. These are their big scientific names. I may refer to them as these. Polistes fuscatus and Polistes diminulis. All right, so here's a picture. Fuscatus is kind of brownish in color. All right, so if you see the brown or reddish ones, those are our native species. Okay, those are the ones that belong here. Polistes diminulis is the yellow and black ones. They're very similar to yellow jacket coloration, but they're a little bigger. Okay, and they're not as bright yellow. And these ones are invasive. Does anybody know what invasive means? Has anybody ever heard of invasive? Yes? Invasive? So invasive means that it comes from somewhere else. So specifically, these come from Europe, and they've invaded Michigan, and they've kind of taken over. So they have kind of taken over our wasps. So they are different. They look different. Like I talked about, they behave differently. We have found in past studies that the invasive species is actually more productive. It does better at everything, so it's out-competing the native species. That means that it's replacing the native species, not directly, it's not attacking them, but what they're doing is they're just taking the resources, taking the good nest sites, and replacing the native species. But these are the two species that I specifically worked with in my research. I know this is a big title, but I'm going to break it down for you behaviorally. So when you do animal behavior research, you usually pick something that you can work. Eusocial animals are great for behavioral research. I chose to use wasps because it's a great way to be able to coordinate what I'm doing. So my title of my thesis, and this big old title, is Colony and Founders' Attributes and Their Influence on Productivity in the Native and the Invasive Wasp. So basically what that means is, in terms maybe at an office level, if you have a group of people working together, how do their behaviors affect productivity? So if you have an office of people, if they're all working together, how does everybody interact with each other? How does that affect output of the office? How does that affect and influence the office? All right, so that is just of my research. So it's really important to find out what makes things efficient, and I wanted to know what makes a colony efficient, okay? And the way that I did this was I studied productivity in wasps, and this is basically how many wasps are made at the end of the season. So how many giants or potential queens are made at the end of the season. And you can tell this by counting the number of cells. I counted a lot of cells. So you count cells, and you count how many cells were used, and that's called meconia. Okay, so that's what I did in my research, is I counted the number of cells and compared that to different attributes of the wasps to find out what had greater productivity. So there are different things that can affect colony productivity. So I talked about the different species, so they have different productivity. Location of where the wasps are affects their productivity because they like to be warm. So if they're in a warm setting, they're going to be more productive. If you have more foundresses on your colony, if you have more wasps, you have more things to do work, right, on the colony. So that way you're going to have more productivity. If your sizes, now if foundresses are close in size, and this is really interesting, if foundresses are close in size, that means they might fight more for dominance. So for example, if you have an office of workers and you have a boss and you have someone who's kind of a supervisor but it's really close in rank with that boss, there may be more arguments or more conflict because they're closer in rank. And when you're closer in rank, you typically have more argument. And when you argue and you can't agree more, then what happens is there's less productivity happening. And aggression I looked at too. If you're more aggressive, your colony is not going to do as well. Just like in an office, if you're fighting all the time, if everybody's fighting in the office, then nothing's going to get done. Your productivity is going to be limited. All right, I'm just going to briefly go through this. So I did look at size differences between foundresses. I wanted to know if their hierarchy, how their hierarchy was standardized. I wanted to know how well did they tolerate each other. Were they really aggressive or did they get along really well? I wanted to know their dominance. So I wanted to know if someone was bossier or they were all, nobody wanted to be the boss, or did everybody want to be the boss? And I looked at their activity level, which is really interesting because if you think if you're in an office of workers, if everybody's hustling and bustling about, the more active you are, the more you bump into everybody else. And so that creates more interactions. And do these interactions help productivity or do they hurt productivity? And I wanted to look at that. All right, so what did I do? I studied colonies of workers. And this is what I used. I know I need to get the camera here. All right. So this is a nest box. Now, colonies of wasps make yummy snacks for raccoons. And raccoons are actually really wily. In fact, we tried a couple different ways to make them not get out of boxes, but they would figure it out. So we had to really protect our colonies. Now, the wasps love to build colonies in here because it's very protected. And like I said, they come back every year, so they come back. So this way, I was able to keep track of my wasps and keep them protected. And they were on an open field setting, so I did not keep them in the lab. This is an open field, and they're all labeled nest boxes. If I had my video, you could have seen what the field looks like, but I don't have my video. So this is an example of the nest box that you can look at up here, and we're done. So I had to know which foundress was which, and I did this by marking them, okay? I had to actually mark these tiny little wasps. And I did this with Testor's enamel paint, and I had to take them into a cold room, all right, because they kind of slow down in a cold room, and so I can't mark them when they're active because they'll sting me. So I just marked them in a cold room, just a couple of different colors so I can look at the different foundresses and know who was who. I also measured their head width, which is really difficult to do. I did it using something very similar to these microscopes, and I measured how many micrometers their head was, very, very tiny. All right, I talked about the nest boxes, and then what I did was I opened the nest box and I would film them. I would film 2-hour videos, and I had a total of 4 hours for each colony, and I had a lot of colonies, and I had to transcribe and watch every single one of these videos, and I had to write down everything the wasp did, from their interactions to what kind of trips they had to everything. I had to write them down, everything that they did. And then after I wrote down everything they did, I had to go through and analyze. I had to determine who the queen was, which I did by trying to find out what her dominance was. So typically, if you're a queen, you're going to do less work on the colony. You're not going to leave the colony as much because it's dangerous. You're not going to hunt for prey because prey trips are dangerous. You're going to do less work and you're going to initiate more interactions. So if you're the boss of an office, you're going to actually initiate more interactions. You're going to be directing more people. So I know the same with the queen. They're going to be directing more interactions. They're also going to be, like I said, they're going to be sending the subordinates or the workers out to do the work. They're going to stay on the nest. So it's very similar to like a boss in the office. So that's how I determined who the queen was. All right, and then I calculated aggression. So I watched every interaction that they did. And they do all different kinds of interactions. They lunge at each other, they bite each other, they will come up and share nectar with each other, and each interaction has a different level of tolerance. And so all I did was I calculated tolerance based on the types of interactions they did. I won't go into a lot of detail on that, but if you do have any questions at the end, I can answer them about how I calculated tolerance. And activity level is pretty self-explanatory. It's how much they moved on the nest. What did they do on the nest? Kind of working on the nest. Did they do inspections, which they inspect cells to make sure that the larvae are doing good? They made cells, so they constructed cells out of wood pulp. And they feed the larvae, because they feed the larvae caterpillars, which I have a good video of if you'd like to see at the end. And then I did lots of statistics, but I'm not going to go over those. All right, lots and lots and lots of mathematical statistics. If you have any questions on them, I'll answer them at the end. So what did I find? I found that co-foundresses that were very different in size, so if they were different in size, had greater productivity. So that basically says, okay, so we're different in size. I'm less likely to fight you. If I look at you and you're bigger than me, I'm not going to win that battle. I'm not going to fight you for dominance. I'm just going to be submissive and be subordinate. That's what that means. So when they're submissive and subordinate, they're more likely to follow orders. They're less likely to fight. Now we have more productivity in the colony. More productivity because we're more likely to take orders, which has supported other studies. All right, what about aggression? Well, I didn't find any significance in aggression and how aggression affected colony productivity, but I did find that colonies that were more tolerant of each other did have slightly more productivity. Okay, they were more productive if they were more tolerant of each other and didn't fight as much. All right. So what about their dominances? So just like head width, I found out that when there was established hierarchy, when everybody knew their role, productivity was better. If you have an office, in your office, if everybody's just kind of trying to do everybody else's job, it's not going to get done. You need to have an established hierarchy to know who's doing what role. And when you have that established hierarchy, you are able to get more things done. You are able to be more productive. So I actually did find this in these colonies of wasps. All right, let's see, activity level. So I found an interesting thing in activity level. I didn't find significance, but I found some really neat trends. So I found that colonies that were more active had lower productivity, which seems counterintuitive, but if you think of it this way, if you are all over the nest moving around and you're more likely to bump into that office worker you don't get along with, all right, then you might have some conflict there, and now you're not going to get anything done because there's going to be more fighting, not much going on in productivity. So it's followed past studies found that when you have foundresses that are more active on the nest, moving around a lot on the nest, and they bump into their sisters, there's more aggressive interactions and leads to lower productivity, which is interesting. However, when I looked at colonies with higher number of foundresses, like 3 foundress colonies, I found that there was no association like that. I didn't find that same thing. This is because when you have a 3 foundress colony, you have the queen and you have the second subordinate fighting, but you still have that third wasp that's able to continue productivity. So she's able to still work while you have the 2 top dogs fighting. However, those 2 top dogs would have higher productivity if we're all established dominance. All right, so I looked at a couple different things. I don't know if I'm going to go through all these statistics because I know there's a lot of them. But I looked at statistical analysis of things that are known to affect productivity. So I did find significantly that species did affect it. The invasive species was more productive. They were just better at everything than the native species. Location, I found affected productivity. So wasps are cold-blooded. That means that they like the heat and the warmth. So colonies that are located in the sun, when they're located in the sun, they actually had higher productivity than colonies located in the in-between areas or even in the shade. Okay, these were much, much lower productivity. So it's actually location of your nest, like maybe even location of your office. Maybe you have higher productivity. If you're in an office and you have no windows and it's kind of dank and dark, maybe your productivity won't be as good as if you have nice, brightly lit, nice office. Okay, so that affects productivity in wasps. Where you found them. Number of foundresses, I didn't find significant effect, but in the past it's been found that number of foundresses affects productivity. The more you have, right, the more productive you are. I only tested 2 foundress colonies and 3 foundress, so it was not a big deal, but if there was bigger colonies, you'll have more productivity. Let's see, so when I looked at some of the other, when I lumped all these in a big statistical test, and I'm not going to go over how the statistical test that I did, I lumped them all together. I found that they were less significant than location and species in number of foundresses. All right, so I looked at the size differences, the hierarchy, the activity and tolerance. When I lumped them in with everything else, I found that they were not as significant as location. So the most important things in productivity were the species and the location of the foundresses. So that's number 1. And then I found out that size differences was the next one down, and then their dominance hierarchy. All right, here's the next one. So, why are wasps important? I always get this question. I always get, well, you did this research looking at these wasps, but why? Why bother? Why is this important? Well, it is important. I mean, any kind of knowledge that we learn about environment is important. And wasps are particularly important. Just like bees, they pollinate. They may not pollinate as much as bees, but they also have another important job in the garden. They get rid of pest insects, like caterpillars. I mean, caterpillars may seem nice, but they can wreck a garden if they overpopulate. They can ruin plant life. So wasps actually control this population. And like I said, wasps are a great way to study eusociality and kin recognition. Kin recognition means recognizing your siblings. In fact, wasps, interesting fact, wasps can recognize facial features, just like humans can. They recognize their sisters not only by smell, but by what their face looks like. And there's been a lot of studies on this, and wasps are a great way to know this study. All right, so that's why they are important. So what I'm going to do, I kind of rushed through a lot of that, is I'm going to allow you guys to come down here. I have live wasps. I have really cool things to look under the microscope. Ask me questions one-on-one. That way you don't have to answer them on the microphone for you, if that's okay with you. All right? So come down and look at my wasps.
The male wasp is the same kind of, and male wasps don't do anything. I'm going to see them. So they get come out in August and they sit there on the nest.
So these are both females, and they're probably giants.
Oh yeah, the females are the ones that we're seeing now. Yeah, this is